Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name is Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, everyone. I hope everyone is well. Hope everyone is staying healthy. We're probably going to do a show on the effects of the coronavirus on the real estate world. But I want it to be absolutely, totally, because of the topic, I want to be absolutely sure we're only considering sources that are spot on. So I'm kind of putting stuff together from the CDC for that one. So stay tuned. That one will be coming. Today, though, we are going to take a little bit of a trip down memory lane. We are living with the repercussions of some things that we talked about on this show back when this was all happening. And what is this? To give everyone a little bit of history, most of you probably remember the downturn. 2006 kind of got rolling, 2007 really got rolling, and by the end of 2007 and 8, everybody was caught up in the real estate downturn. Huge drops in value in markets all across the country. Some markets hurt a whole lot more than others. And we discussed at that time a lot of the reasons why that was a problem and looked at that. But we also talked about how it was being managed once we started to get a handle on the problem. So here's where the history part comes in. As most of you know, a ton of homes got foreclosed on, right? We had nothing but foreclosed homes. I can remember having listings for properties back during that time where I had a listing for actually a really good friend of mine who lived in Hollister at the time and was moving to San Jose. So I helped him find his home in San Jose, had to sell his home in Hollister. And from his front porch, I could point to 8 properties that were in foreclosure, all of them being sold for less than what we were hoping to get for his property. I don't want this to be a totally yay Robert moment, but managed to do it. Got that home sold faster than just about any other property in the area, for more than any other home in the area. Lots of kudos need to go to that owner because of how well they maintained the home. So it showed a heck of a lot better. But anyway, the point is we had a ton of foreclosed homes. They ended up held mostly by government-sponsored entities or were going to be sold through government-sponsored entities. And that's the Fannies and the Freddies. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, go check out some of my previous shows. We've talked all about that. So then came the time when these properties needed to be sold, right? Now, the reason why we care about how these properties were sold is because of an article that came out from the New York Times with the headline, "A $60 billion housing grab by Wall Street." And I know that we love to make anything associated with Wall Street the whipping boy or girl. But in this case, we need to focus more on the allies to these folks in government that made this happen. The subline here on this particular story is hundreds of thousands of single-family homes are now in the hands of giant companies, squeezing renters for revenue and putting the American dream even further out of reach. Okay, so let's talk about how we got here. They're very interested in talking about the problem as it exists now. And I agree it's a problem. And frankly, I thought it would be a problem back when they were doing it that way. When they were selling these properties, my suggestion, what I thought was the safest and smartest way to get these properties sold was to partner with eBay or create your own portal or whatever and just have these properties be listed so that individuals could buy them, right? that represented to me fairness in the marketplace to any folks, right? If you were somebody who was living in Florida and there was a foreclosed home down the street from you, if you could just buy that single home, that'd be great, right? And some of you may be thinking, well, isn't that the way that it was done? No. By and large, that is not the way it was done. What FHA, Fannie, Freddie, you know, all of those guys, the government-sponsored entities, they created a system where you had to buy these properties by and large in huge chunks. I did a show on this specific process back when it was happening. It's in the archives back there. You can check it out. It's so this would be 2010 or 11, I think, from there. Almost sure it's going to be on the Libsyn stream, so you can go back and check that out. But in any event, I went through what the process would be to qualify to make a bid on these properties. And it was ridiculous. What they had done is bundled properties so that the only way you could have any hope of buying them is if you didn't come to buy one property, but you came to buy hundreds of properties. They were bulk putting them together. They were creating these batches of homes that you had to bid on, which didn't make sense at the time to me at all, right? If you're going to sell it in bundles like that, you're going to end up not getting the maximum dollar per unit, right? There's going to be a discount overall on these properties when you do that. So there were so many elements of it that didn't make sense to me. From the we're the government and we want to get our money back standpoint, didn't make any sense. From the we want to create or we want to foster or okay, there's a long list of things. We want to be fair. We want to not see anyone monopolizing properties. And we want to foster a real estate market moving forward that's dynamic, right? Everything they did results in the opposite of that. So what they did is they created a scenario where only folks with millions and millions of dollars could come in and buy properties. I have no doubt that if they had gone the other route, if they had simply individually listed each property on either a website they created, I'd rather they didn't. Partner up with someone who actually knows what they're doing when it comes to that stuff. eBay existed, right? Could have easily been a partnership with eBay or anybody else that does online auctions or whatever, and allowed individuals to buy those properties. Two things would have happened. One, odds are, on a per house basis, they would have made more money. In terms of creating a future robust market, they would have guaranteed that the homes are now in the hands of the largest number of individuals possible. And instead what they created were these monolithic holders of property who'd never owned property before. You had all kinds of businesses deciding to buy properties because they saw it as an opportunity. And some of them would partner up with property management firms or roll their own or do whatever, and then manage these properties. And so now what you see today is two flavors of things. Folks continuing to hold on to these properties because rents just still represent such a great return. And companies that prior to this were never really real estate focused companies anyway and sort of just took advantage of it. And then they've liquidated and moved on. But in addition, in those scenarios, those homes are tending to get liquidated in larger chunks as well. So the problem with this article is the reason we're in this bind isn't because of Wall Street. The reason we're in this bind is because of the policies embraced by the government-sponsored entities and the folks in Congress who give them the cue on what to do and how to do it. Now, to give you sort of some insights here in terms of what the article has to share with us, I'll give you sort of the first intro here. Chad Ellingwood wasn't really in the market for a home in the summer of 2006, but when his friend came across an intriguing listing in Woodland Hills, a bedroom community in Los Angeles County's San Fernando Valley, the two men decided to visit on a whim. Entering the property beneath the canopy of a grand deodar, Ellingwood, a big man with a gentle presence, felt as if he had been transported to a ranch house in Northern California, much like one he often visited as a child, all old growth and overgrown greenery, olive trees, citrus trees, sycamores, and redwoods. He and his friend meandered past a pond to an inviting teal house built in 1958, quote, a whimsical masterpiece, Ellingwood told me. Inside there was a captain's quarters, a room designed to look like the hull of a boat with a built-in waterbed and drawers and numerous stained glass windows, and the couple who owned it had made that they had made themselves. The Pays de Resistance depicted a fairy woman with flowing hair whose fingers turned into peacock feathers. Okay, side note. I've dealt with listings where that kind of stuff was true, with fairy pictures on the wall. Not a good plan. Anyway, behind the house were a couple of small buildings, one of which was office-sized, a meditation Zen den, Ellingwood thought. The other was an A-frame, Swiss chalet-style granny unit above the garage, where the owner displayed a toy train collection. Quote, the house was not in amazing shape, Ellingwood said. It needed some help, but I loved it. I wanted it immediately. One of Ellingwood's goals had always been to buy a house by the time he turned 30, a birthday that unceremoniously came and went 6 months earlier. When Ellingwood began speaking to lenders, he realized he could easily get a loan, even two. This was the height of the bubble when mortgage brokers were keen to generate mortgages, even risky ones, because the debt was being bundled together, securitized, and spun into a dizzying array of bonds for a hefty profit. It goes on here to talk about the price and all these other kinds of things. Bad things happened, and then, let's see, through it, divorce, those kinds of horrible things. In the months after that, it was graced with what seemed like a bit of luck. The company that bought his home offered to sell it back to him for $100,000 more than he had paid to acquire it. He told the company Strategic Acquisitions that he just needed a little time to get together a down payment. In the meantime, the company asked him to sign a 2-page rental agreement with a 2-page addendum. What they're doing here is sort of painting the picture here. They're giving a very soft, focused personality story here. It was clear from the beginning that there was something a little unusual about his new landlords. Instead of mailing his rent checks to a management company, men would swing by to pick them up. Within a few months, Ellingwood noticed that one of the checks he had written for $2,000 wasn't accounted for in his rental ledger, though it had been cashed. He called and emailed and texted to resolve the problem, and finally emailed to say that he wouldn't pay more rent until the company could explain where his $2,000 went. For more than 3 months, he withheld rent, waiting for a response. Instead, the company posted an eviction notice on his door. So what they're going with is this, this hardship story. But we need to understand a couple of things. One, the reason why I read that is because a lot of this does have this feel where we have companies that typically weren't landlord companies buying properties in the downturn, because the only way you could acquire these properties were if you were a big corporation. And now there's some downside to poor management. The article, after giving this sort of intended to pull at your heartstrings story, goes on to say Wall Street's latest real estate grab has ballooned to roughly 60 million, representing hundreds of thousands of properties. In some communities, it has fundamentally altered housing ecosystems in ways we're only now beginning to understand. The big downside, according to one professor of urban studies at Georgia State, quote, during one of the greatest recoveries of land value in the history of the country from 2010 and 11, at the bottom of the crisis to now, we've seen huge gains in property values, especially in suburbs. Instead of that accruing to many moderate income and middle income homeowners, many of whom were pushed out of the home ownership market during the crisis, that land value has accrued to these big companies and their shareholders. Yeah, it has, through no fault of these companies. These companies did not go out and look to buy individual houses. In fact, if each of these houses had been sold individually, you can bet that while some of them might have been purchased, the vast majority would be in the hands of individual homeowners or small mom and pop investors that were looking to buy a home that they could turn into a rental. So the problem here is not that Wall Street folks came in and purchased these things. The problem is the way these properties were liquidated. So it needs to be a little bit more honest in terms of how we got where we are. I've never been a huge fan in a micromanaging of something like this. I wasn't a fan then. I'm still not a fan. But it annoys me when And yeah, is that an example of total mismanagement? Yeah. Is it also probably a corner case or not the majority case or even an extreme minority case? Also true. But let's not use this as an opportunity to beat up on these Wall Street organizations. Let's look at that as a way to beat up on the government policies and government-sponsored agencies that facilitated these getting into the hands of these companies. Because there's another angle to this, right? We've talked about the negative effects on the outside, on the public side, on the you and me side of this process. Well, let's look at the other side of that. The scary part is a whole lot of the politicians that contribute to these decisions also happen to have pretty cozy relationships with a lot of these companies that ended up doing a lot of the buying. Feels like kind of a conflict of interest to me that those kinds of things should be handed down by folks who either themselves may materially benefit because maybe they're shareholders in those companies or maybe even officers of those companies, or they're helping friends and relatives who are friends and relatives or big shareholders. So that's kind of where I come down on this one. I think it's a story that's worth telling, particularly because this is a perfect example of stories that you need to take a slightly deeper look at. This is one where if you just read the headline, you just read the story, you'd come away thinking, those dirty, rotten Wall Street guys. Well, no, if you operated at that level, right? I mean, for folks like you and me, if you knew that what would be something that would be in the ballpark? If you knew that you could buy an asset, a thing, let's say a car, right? Cars aren't normally thought of as assets. They don't tend to hold their value. But let's say someone came along and said, I will sell you this car for $20,000. Or you know that these kinds of cars normally go for $20,000 when things are normal, but right now the market's depressed. And the organizations that are trying to sell these cars are saying, okay, you know what? We'll sell you 100 of these cars for $10,000, right? That kind of brings the numbers closer to being understandable. Maybe we need to go with something even less expensive. But if the example holds, right? If you have something that you know is normally worth about $20, and someone says, if you buy 10 of them, I'll sell them to you for $5 each, you know that there's a high potential for you to make profit on the back end of that, right? So we as individuals, do we just say, oh, well, I shouldn't do that because these should be owned by a more broad group of people? No. You take an opportunity and you run with it, right? Well, that's what these folks did. Now, we can have arguments about how well they manage those properties after the fact and beat them up for that. And in some cases like this one, they clearly should be. But let's put the blame where it deserves to be. And that's clearly on the policymakers and the folks who ran the process that liquidated these foreclosed properties. Okay, so not a whole lot of actionable stuff, just the idea that in the future, when we see foreclosures, which is the way it was normally done, right? It's not like, well, they've always sold foreclosed properties in bulk. No, the normal way was to sell them as individual properties, but because of this, because we had a higher volume, they decided to sell them in bulk chunks. And this is the price we're paying. And I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right, when it comes to these things. And even I was able to call it way back when it was happening that this was an absolutely stupid way to sell these properties and pointed out what would happen, and it's happening. What a surprise. So plenty to be frustrated about here. I encourage you to take a closer look at it, see if you agree or if you don't. Please feel free to, if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure to subscribe at therebelbroker.com. You can also reach out to me at my website, soldbyrobert.com, if you're interested in buying, selling, or investing in real estate in Silicon Valley. I'm your guy, happy to help you in whatever way I can. And again, you can reach me at soldbyrobert.com. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.